Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at something absolutely fascinating. It's a piece of everyday infrastructure that, well, it just quietly vanished from our lives. We're going to explore the incredible 150-year rise, the gritty, dark pivot, and the ultimate extinction of the American payphone. It's literally a cinematic story that happened right beneath our feet, so let's get right into it.
2 million. To put that into perspective, in the year 1990, there were over 2 million payphones scattered across America. 2 million individual booths just sitting on street corners, in diners, outside gas stations, and, hotel lobbies. This was the absolute, staggering peak of this technology. They were quite literally everywhere you looked.
But then, fast forward with me for a second. By the year 2023, out of all those 2 million buzzing hubs of conversation, only a single working payphone remained in the entire country. Just one. I mean, the sheer scale of that drop-off is almost hard to wrap your head around.
And then it was just gone. That final payphone disappeared too. When the end finally came, it left behind just a bare patch of concrete. Think about that. There was no press release, there were no news cameras rolling, and absolutely no ceremony to mark the end of an era. Just poof, gone.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The golden age of the payphone.
To really understand what we lost here, we've got to flashback to the majority of the 20th century. Making a call didn't start by pulling a piece of glass out of your pocket. It started with a sound, that distinct, piercing ring calling out into the street. Then, the heavy metallic clink of coins dropping down into the slot. And finally, the clunk of that glass bifold door closing behind you. For decades, stepping into that isolated little room was just how you made a connection with the outside world.
To grasp just how baked into society these things were, let's look at 1960. Back then, there was one payphone for every 300 Americans. They were so deeply embedded in daily life that kids were literally taught to memorize phone numbers. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just taught. It was a survival skill, just in case they ever found themselves stranded and needed to find a booth to call home.
Because payphones were the everyday heroes of communication. Think about it. Car breaks down on a dark highway? You used a payphone. Just needed to check in and call your mom? You used a payphone. Soldiers called home from these very phones during wars. And, of course, in almost every classic movie, the hero always sprints to a phone booth to make that one desperate, life-saving call.
Section 2. The dark side of anonymity. But the story of the payphone isn't all golden nostalgia. By the 1980s and 90s, the humble phone booth evolved into something much, much darker. They became the perfect tool for criminals. See, because calls were incredibly hard to trace back then, these public booths essentially transformed into an untraceable, anonymous utility for the criminal underworld. And the scale of the chaos surrounding them is genuinely shocking. 1,000. In New York City alone, over 1,000 payphones were being vandalized every single month. This relentless wave of destruction was costing phone companies millions upon millions of dollars just to try and keep the network barely functioning.
These booths essentially became operational hubs for the streets. They were prime meeting spots for drug deals. They became literal crime scenes. Police would frequently find bodies right next to them. Street gangs used them to safely make anonymous threats. And right alongside organized crime, there was this rampant, senseless vandalism. People would smash the glass, set fire to the directories, and physically rip the handset cords right out of the metal boxes, sometimes just for fun.
Section 3. The cellular takeover. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what happened next. The landscape shifted practically overnight. Look at this. In 1995, only 14% of Americans had a cell phone. Just 10 years later, in 2005, it rockets to 63%. And by 2015, we're at almost 100%. The business logic for the phone companies was undeniable, right? Why would you ever walk down the block in the freezing rain to a payphone when you could just pull a phone right out of your own pocket?
The direct consequence of that was the Great Phase-Out, and the scale of this removal was monumental. 10,000 gone, then 100,000 gone, then 1 million gone. Cities entirely stopped maintaining them. Sure, a lucky few were creatively repurposed, turned into those cute little neighborhood libraries or quirky street art projects, but the vast, vast majority, unceremoniously ripped from the concrete and thrown in the trash.
Section 4. The last payphone. So out of that massive 150-year-old network, for years, the very last working payphone in America stood proudly in a small town called Newcastle, New Hampshire. It was mounted right outside a local convenience store, and incredibly, it still worked flawlessly. It even still took physical quarters.
People literally started treating it like a living museum piece. Tourists would drive hours out of their way, completely bypassing their smartphones, just to take a photograph standing next to it.
And the store owner, he felt this deep connection to preserving this piece of history. He simply said, as long as one person needs it, I'll keep it here. That statement, it just holds such incredible emotional weight, doesn't it? He knew exactly what he was preserving.
But inevitably, we reached the end of the line. In 2023, the phone company finally made the call to the owner. The corporate decision was final. The underlying lines were simply too old to maintain. Honestly, no one was actually using it to make calls anymore, so it cost the company far more to maintain than it ever generated. Plus, legally, they no longer had any obligation to keep it there. So, on a quiet Tuesday morning, 2 workers arrived with a truck. They unbolted it from the ground, they cut the old wires, and they just drove away. 150 years of history, completely gone.
So, the crucial point is, Section 5, trading privacy for convenience. What did we actually lose when those final wires were cut? Let's step back for a moment and reflect on the true hidden cost of this. For decades, these booths were the absolute only place a vulnerable person could reach the outside world without being tracked or needing an expensive monthly subscription. They were critical lifelines where desperate runaways called their parents. They were safe spaces where people reported crimes anonymously, and they guaranteed basic communication for someone with absolutely no money. We basically willingly traded shared public space and untracked privacy for isolated personal screens and total convenience. Think about it. Today, if you need 911, you use your own highly tracked smartphone. If you happen to lose that phone, your only option is to awkwardly ask to borrow a complete stranger's personal device. We no longer have that neutral public lifeline available to anyone, anytime.
Which leaves us with a pretty vital question. Was the trade-off worth it? As we wrap up this explainer, take a second to reflect on this profound loss of privacy and shared connection. The next time you watch an old classic movie and see someone frantically running into a phone booth, remember this. That wasn't just a convenient cinematic prop. That was exactly how America used to talk to each other. And now, it's just